As I open up the model of the brain here, one of the things I want you to realize is that this is not a solid mass of tissue. There are actually open cavities inside here. In fact, one of the things that I mentioned was that although this is the area of the thalamus, when I tilt it on the side, I could drip water in here, and that water would fill up these little spaces here and work its way all the way down. I mentioned this was called the third ventricle. This is the mesencephalic aqueduct, and this is the fourth ventricle. Another thing I want to point out on the diencephalon model is that, remember, when we open this up, this, what you're seeing here, is really just a mirror view of what we have on the opposite side. So this is going to be the exact same thing. We've sort of peeled away these lobes that we have here, but this should look very similar. It should look like it's the same thing. This right here, and I know this is an odd looking one, this is a model of the ventricles of our brain. So the ventricles of our brain are really the open cavities that we have in our brain. What do I mean by that? If I took this model and I sort of wrapped it around here, you could start to see how this actually fits quite nicely. So this is not an actual structure, this silver thing that you're looking at. It's not an actual structure. It's actually a model of nothing. And what I mean by that, it's representing the open spaces that we have in our brain. So one of the things that I mentioned was that this area is called the third ventricle. This is the thalamic hemisphere, and this is the thalamus, but this area here is the third ventricle. If I show you this right here, again, they probably look a little bit similar. This here is also called the third ventricle. I mentioned that in the brain, this area is called the fourth ventricle. Third ventricle, mesencephalic aqueduct, fourth ventricle. Same thing here. This is the third ventricle. This is the mesencephalic aqueduct, and this is the fourth ventricle. In fact, on this model, I showed you that this pink structure is the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. The choroid plexus of the third ventricle. That's the exact same choroid plexus that you're seeing right here. So if this is the third ventricle, and this is the mesencephalic aqueduct, and this is the fourth ventricle, that makes these the lateral ventricles. We don't call them ventricle 1, ventricle 2, but that's basically what they are. This would be the left lateral ventricle. This would be the right lateral ventricle. We have something called the interventricular foramen. That would be this opening right here, again, which leads from the lateral ventricles to the third ventricle. And then we have the mesencephalic aqueduct, which leads from the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. And then, of course, it doesn't show it here, but the central canal of the spinal cord would then move all the way through here. But these are the open cavities in our brain. If I took this and I sort of squished this side on, and then I squished this side on, and then I made a mold, and I peeled them apart, this is what would represent the mold there. That would be the open cavities in our brain. We call them the ventricles of the brain.